Hey everyone, and welcome back to Don't Open That Door. I am Justin, the concerned neighbor.
I'm Nico, the world-renowned children's book author and metalhead Roald Thal.
Wow. And I'm Dan, the Baba Dan.
And as you might have been able to tell from that last statement, we are here today to review The Babadook. Directed by Jennifer Kent, it stars Essie Davis as Amelia Vanek, Noah Wiseman as Samuel, and Tim Purcell as the Babadook. So we open this movie with Amelia, a woman who lost her husband in a car accident 7 years ago, as he was driving her to the hospital to give birth to their son, Sam. Sam is a very active young boy, and he is obsessed with magic tricks and monsters. He's even built kind of like a shoulder launcher that shoots cricket balls. Amelia has a lot of trouble controlling him, and one day she chooses to remove him from school after the faculty complains about him bringing a mini crossbow to class. That's pretty wild. I think things are going to get a little wilder. Go ahead. Tell us, Dan.
So one night, Sam asks his mother to read him from a new book on his shelf called The Babadook. The book describes a nightmarish creature who haunts the occupants of a house that look just like Sam and Amelia. This leads to Sam believing that the Babadook is real and is after him and his mother, and he states several times that he will protect her. Strange things start to happen, such as Amelia finding glass in her food one night, and Sam tells her it was the Babadook. Amelia rips the book up and throws it away.
As I think anyone would do. Nico, what happens after that?
So afterwards, Sam persists in his belief of the Babadook, which leads to an incident with Amelia's sister/niece, and he has a seizure all the while. Amelia finds the Bababook, that being the picture book telling the story of the Babadook, on her porch, put back together after she ripped it out. And it has new pages and new words and new pictures depicting her killing her dog, her son, and then herself. Amelia burns the book and files a police report, but nobody takes her seriously because she burned her only piece of evidence, which that sucks. At this point, Amelia starts to have a mental breakdown, and she becomes more aggressive towards her son, which culminates in her cutting her phone line and threatening Sam with a knife.
Well, that is not good. Dan, what follows that?
Amelia then sees her dead husband, but realizes that it's actually the Babadook. She attempts to resist, but is eventually caught and possessed by the entity. Amelia ends up killing their dog, sad, and goes after Sam, but in what can only be described as truly a Home Alone-esque series of traps, Sam manages to subdue her and tie her up in the basement. Amelia wakes up, still possessed, and Sam pleads with her, telling her that he will always love her and is there to protect her. Amelia manages to reject the Babadook's influence from her body, but it grabs Sam and drags him upstairs.
Nico, close this out here.
So, Amelia pursues the Babadook and saves Sam. She confronts the trauma of losing her husband and, in doing so, defeats the Babadook and regains agency over her family. It retreats into the basement and she locks the door behind it. A short amount of time passes and we see a much mentally healthier Amelia celebrating Sam's birthday. The house even looks brighter. Sam gives her some worms, and Amelia takes them into the basement where the Babadook confronts her, but Amelia calms it down, and it takes the worms. And Amelia returns upstairs to enjoy her son's birthday.
Well, that's the movie. So, I think we should get things rolling. Nico, you already talked about what stuff looked like towards at the end there, so tell me more about the visuals in this movie altogether. How's it look?
It looks fucking bleak, mate. Like, this is a house that is dull, boring, and lifeless. And I'm not talking like white walls or anything. This is a purposefully dark looking house. It almost looks similar to the house that we saw in The Conjuring 2, where there was just a very bleak color scheme, very muted tones, and the only real definition that you would see in any of the shots is from the characters, which shows how just strained their relationships are between each other, and also just how difficult and strained of a time they have just trying to live in the place.
In terms of the bleak colors and coloration, I read that when they were doing the color grading for this movie, they took very, very special care in making sure that the scenes maintain that kind of bleak imagery, kind of almost washed out feeling. Dan, any thoughts from you as far as the visuals go?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's very bleak. And then there's a pretty stark contrast. At one point, Amelia and Sam go to somebody else's, like the sister's child's birthday, and so they go over to their house, and it's very bright, and it's a very stark contrast between the two different houses and the settings. And then also, I like some of the lens blurs and things that happen once Amelia gets possessed by the Babadook. We see like the camera kind of jumps around a little bit, kind of glitchy almost, and the camera blurs and things like that. I actually really like that part a lot. So I thought a lot of the visuals were pretty cool.
And before we move on to audio, Nico, I want to turn it back to you real quick.
Hit me.
How would you describe the titular villain here, the Babadook? How would you describe its appearance in this movie?
So this is a figure that is hooded in shadow and darkness the entire time, but it looks very much like the actual pictures in the children's book. And I think there's a pretty big point there. There is a lot of this movie that is almost fairy tale-esque, but in a very, 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 very dark way. Towards that end, it's got very long limbs, massive claws, horrific sort of like sunken face, very big mouth. And the thing that I like about its appearance the most is that the set designers really portray Amelia's just very fragile sanity and her frayed sort of mentality insofar as she keeps seeing it in very everyday objects. Like she'll see a coat and be like, oh, that's the Babadook, or she'll see a hat and some gloves and it'll like freak her out. And I love that they actually did that really well.
Yeah, I was going to say that the appearance of the hat and the coat and the kind of elongated nails a little bit on the gloves or whatever, it kind of reminded me almost of the Crooked Man from The Conjuring 2.
Yeah, I can
Like
see that.
that
I can
brought
see
that
that.
to my mind. So I
Or
was thinking,
Slender Man.
or what's it, Nico? It's not Slender Man. It's the
It's Elongated Man.
no,
What
it
is
was
it?
it was the elongated lad. Or Nico and I were watching some kind of top 10 horror shorts this weekend, and someone had a picture of the Slender Man, but they didn't call him the Slender Man. They called him like the
Long
bony
Boy or some
yeah,
shit.
the bony lad or something like that. I was like, yo, come on now, really? Like, you know who that is? But in any case, Dan, audio here. Lace us. How was the track?
So this to me was a film where we've kind of mentioned it before on the podcast. To me, the music particularly didn't really stand out, and I mean that in a relatively good way. I think it accentuated the film well, but it didn't. It to me there wasn't anything like standout about it. I like a lot of the screaming and things that the Babadook did, for lack of better words. It was some like really like harsh screaming noise, and like almost like a very human scream, but also not. It wasn't like a deep demonic roar kind of scream, but just like very shrill kind of scream, which I liked quite a bit. Overall, I mean, I thought the audio was pretty good.
I'm pretty much in agreement with you there. Nico, your thoughts?
So I will echo y'all's takes there, but one thing that I will say is that they used the music, just the cacophony of the music, in a very, very tension building way. There weren't any really main themes or anything or motifs that came into play, but one thing that I really did notice about this when I was watching was just how almost oppressive the background noise was, and it made it almost like a sensory overload in a way when we were put in the perspective of Amelia's shoes. She's dealing with a kid who she can't control. She's got no sleep for basically months on end, and she's clearly losing it. And just hearing it build and build and build and build, it was done very well in this, and I was noticing that I was much more tense when those scenes were occurring and the music was sort of like ramping up.
That is true. That is one thing that I did like too, now that you mention it. Whenever she was reading the book or the Babadook would sort of be there would either be like a very like quiet sort of like cricket noise that would sort of be just permeate the scene and kind of grow louder, or like you said, cacophonous noise, and then as soon as she would like burn the book or rip it up or close it or something, it would like very abruptly stop. And I thought that was kind of cool.
All right, well, I feel like we've talked about the creature enough, so I think it's time for us to decide here. What is the Babadook? Because there's really two ways to think about it. Either A, the Babadook is an actual entity haunting Amelia, or the second option is going to be that it's Amelia's imagination. So I want the three of us to first say either real or imaginary. And then after we've all said that, we can all kind of discuss our viewpoint. So, Dan, real or imaginary?
I think it's imaginary.
I'm for imaginary as well. Nico?
I think it's real. I definitely think it's real.
All right, we're set up for a 2v1 here.
All right.
So
all right.
let's go ahead. First off, Nico, seeing as how you were the wrong one here, why don't you posit your points first?
So I was going to say, instead of real or imaginary, I was going to say yes, because I view it as a manifestation of the guilt and the trauma that Amelia really just hasn't dealt with in regarding her husband's death. It is something that has physical form. It's something that can interact with the environment around her. And it is something that is able to sort of manipulate the fabric of reality around her. I think it is something that definitely is more so cerebral. Like, I don't think necessarily if she called the cops when the Babadook was there that they would still be there. I think it was very real to them, though. And I don't know if you're going to call that a cop-out or not, so I'm just going to leave it there.
Well, I would be a cop in because you said she called the cops. But no.
Boo.
I try. So are you saying, though, and this is the kind of... So for the record, I'm in agreement that the Babadook is a manifestation of the kind of unfaced trauma and, you know, those feelings that Amelia has. But I don't think the Babadook was ever real or existed or ever manipulated anything.
I agree with that.
That's my viewpoint.
I disagree.
So do you think it was like an actual entity? Whether or not people could see it or whatever, you think this was an actual, for real force acting on her and Sam?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
So part of the reason why I think it's all kind of imaginary or in her head, first off, do you know who's the one writing the book?
Didn't have an author.
It was her. She was the one writing it.
That's actually not been confirmed.
Oh, see, but you heard about it though, right?
I have heard about that, yes. There is a theory online that there's a scene when Amelia's taking Sam to her sister's birthday party / niece's birthday party, and in one of the scenes where it's just the adults talking, Amelia says that she mentions that, yeah, I used to write for magazines and do like children's stories and stuff. There's a theory that that was her, but we never see if it was actually her.
So another reason that I think it was her is because it's, first off, the book is about her and her son, the fact that they have a dog, everything else. And the only person who could have brought that book back to her in that condition and written new pages is her. And on top of that, when she goes to the police station,
Could be magic.
well, it could be magic, but I think also when she goes to the police station, I actually think she's got the charcoal from the book rubbing on her hands. I'm pretty certain that's what it is.
Yeah, it's because she had just set up a fire and burned it.
I mean, I can burn something pretty easily without getting my hands with that kind of. I mean, she wasn't like grilling the book.
She did it on the grill. She had to set up the charcoal.
I don't know about that. I feel like that's from the drawing of it because, in my perspective, she's been the one who. Because think about it, like the book didn't just appear in the house. I feel like she was the one who put the book there, and she's the one who did all that stuff. And I think that because the Babadook in the book, like when they talk about it, and it's like you can't hide from me, and like you can never get rid of the Babadook, and like to me, it's a very very clear metaphor that she is confronting her unresolved trauma through this Babadook, through this monster. And
Definitely.
all the times that we see the Babadook happening or whatever else, I don't think Sam ever sees the Babadook, but I think, well, we'll talk about that in just a little bit, but
He says that he does, though.
I don't think he actually sees it, but we'll get to that. Dan, say your piece.
First, I think when you're talking about who wrote the book, even though I don't think that the Babadook is real, physically manifests, I think that the reasoning behind your writing that you gave that she wrote the book could also very easily be explained by the Babadook wrote the book too. Like I think that the I guess you were thinking of that was somebody had to write the book because the Babadook isn't real, so it has to be her. But if you say, oh, well, the Babadook could be real, it also makes sense that the Babadook wrote the book, or it's a magical book in that sort of sense, I guess. But I agree with you on everything else. I don't think that the Babadook ever exists. There's a couple times where she finds like a hole in the behind her refrigerator and there's cockroaches coming out of it. And then later on, a couple people come by the house and she's like, yeah, there's a hole behind my fridge. And they look and there's no hole. And there's plenty of times where we see that things like I think Nico had mentioned that it is sort of manipulating reality around her. But not only do I think that other people can't see it, I just don't think that any of those actually exist. And I can't really think of a single time that happens, the single thing that happens in the movie that can't be explained by her own trauma. And we see her sort of start to abuse her child, Sam, a little bit near the end. And I think like even when Sam is being like slammed against the wall, I personally kind of view that as she might have actually been slamming him up against the wall, and in her sort of, I don't want to say possessed, but in her mental illness or
Her fugue state,
yeah,
I guess.
exactly, yeah. So that's kind of how I took it personally.
Well, who's right? No one's right, much like
Oh,
Nas.
oh.
No, I mean, that's obviously, audience listeners, you guys can decide on what exactly is right or wrong in our statements there. But I want to transition over to Sam now. So I want to pose the question, why is Sam so worried about his mom? And he's not really worried for himself. He's worried more so about his mom. He makes constant references to the fact that he will protect his mom. And he makes constant, promises like, I love you, I'll protect you. And like, if you help me, I'll help you, whatever else. Like, he always does that. So, Nico, why do you think Sam's so worried about his mom?
So, kids are way smarter than they let on, and they catch a lot of stuff that we don't realize is like coming through in our actions, even the smallest stuff. I am 1000% sure that Sam knew that his mom was dealing with some shit and knew pretty much exactly what was going on. Like, there's some trauma with dad being gone, and there's a pretty big hole in her life and her mentality. I am pretty positive that he is just trying to be the hero that his mom needs, really, and just be whatever sort of beacon of light that he can.
Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think that he sees that she's going through some shit and understands that and maybe can't quite grasp exactly what she's going through or anything, but understands that she is going through something. And he says one line near the end that I really, it sort of just clicked now that what he meant after he kind of like ties her up and is trying to like basically exorcise her. He says, you don't love me because the Babadook won't let you love me. And at first I was like, well, damn, the Babadook's only been here for like 2 minutes. But then I was like, well, shit, like the Babadook is the trauma since he's been born, because that's when the father was killed. So like he understands that his mom, it's not that his mom doesn't love him, but it's that the trauma and everything won't let her look past that, I guess.
It's a lot easier, I think, in particularly with how kids process things. A lot of that is through play and sort of like creating like fantasy ideals. It is a lot easier for a 6-year-old to say like, you can't love me because the Babadook won't let you, as opposed to the 6-year-old saying, well, Amelia, we're actually going to sit down here and diagnose your neuroses and talk about all the trauma you've been through. Like, that is the thing that makes sense to him.
Right.
So I think that's why he says that.
Yeah. So going back to that same line, and I forgot to mention it, that to me was one of the major reasons why I also thought the Babadook wasn't real, because I think that Sam is aware that the Babadook doesn't really exist. And I think that he understands as well that the Babadook is basically kind of like it is basically I don't want to say personification because it's not a person, but it's like the formation and of his mother's grief. And I don't think he knows enough to know that, like you said, Nico, that his mom is like, he knows his mom is sad because we know what he's obsessed with. He's obsessed with magic. He's obsessed with monsters and fighting them. And he wants to, like you said, he wants to protect his mom. So he wants to also believe that his mom, really loves him, even though sometimes she's not the best. And so he's like, yeah, it must be this monster. This monster must be doing this to you, and I'll protect you from it. Just please don't let anything bad happen to me. And, I do think that's probably one of my favorite points in the movie is that Amelia's issues that she has and the things that she's got going on, they affect her very obviously, but I mean, it affects her son a lot too. And I think a lot of what he does, like a lot of that acting out, is so she'll pay attention to him. There's a part where he climbs up really high on some kind of like playset thing or whatever, and he's like screaming at her to like look at him, just like look at me. And all he wants is some attention. And she can't give it to him because she's enveloped in trying to work through her own stuff right then and there. So I do think that's kind of like, and I did like Sam as a character, by the way. But and for listeners in the audience, you had to know this was coming. I have a question for you, Nico. For you too, Dan.
Okay.
It's more so for you, Nico. Nico, is this a horror movie?
Yes, it's a horror movie. What the fuck else is it? It's not a rom-com.
Dan, what kind of horror is this?
I don't know. I mean, it's not like a slasher. It's not like a creature feature. I would have to say it might be prestige horror.
Oh my god.
Aw, shit.
Fuck. All right, so Dan puts his vote in for prestige horror. I'm gonna give a hot take here. This type of hot take you could only find right here.
Go off, King.
I say if The Mummy's not a horror movie, neither is this.
What?
Hear me out.
What?
Hear me out. So when we reviewed The Mummy, we basically said that, yeah, there's some horror elements in it for sure, but the film by and large is kind of like a action adventure type film. By and large, that was kind of the consensus. Now, to me, the actual horrific moments in this movie are generally few and far between. And I think that literally the only quote unquote straight up horror parts are at the very end, where Amelia gets kind of possessed, she vomits out the kind of black liquid, and then she, tells off the Babadook upstairs. Like, those are like the true horror moments. And I personally view this to be, again, I think this is more drama. I think if we really looked at the elements and honestly analyzed them, I think this weighs much more heavily in terms of drama than it does horror. I think it is drama with a horror flavoring to it, sure. But I think The Mummy has more horror to it than this movie does. So I'm asking for some consistency from the pod, if you will.
Okay, you're talking about consistency, but you're the one who says The Mummy is horror. So by your own logic, this is horror.
Well, but I was voted down, son. I was voted down.
Yeah, but we asked
but hear me
you,
out.
is this
But
horror?
it's not equal amounts though. I said I think The Mummy has more.
True. Fair enough.
So I think that this one, I think it barely has any horror to it. I think the vast majority of it is an analysis of the grief of this woman. And I think, yeah, it does use horror on certain points, but I mean, just because scary things happen doesn't make it horror. IMO.
Now that you kind of say that, I think I'm inclined to agree. Because I'm also thinking about fucking The Haunting of...
Bly Manor?
Yes, Bly Manor, thank you. And how that to me wasn't really horror either. It was drama, romance, whatever, wrapped in horror wrapping. But I think this movie is very similar to Bly Manor. Obviously not the romance part, but similar like drama elements kind of. And I think I agree. I think it's a drama. This movie is a drama that has horrific elements and is sort of presented as a horror. But I think if you get down to it, I kind of think the core of it is more of a drama.
Nico, the ground is crumbling beneath you, sir.
Dan, you betrayed me.
I'm
This will not
sorry.
stand. No, I think this is absolutely horror. I Personally, so Justin, you were saying about how there aren't that many horrific things that happen in the movie, and while I think that's true, I think that you don't have as many scenes of like, vomiting bile as you would in, I don't know, the fucking Exorcist or something. I think that throughout the movie there is dread that is built, and there's terror in the living experience of seeing Amelia's perspective. I think we've all pretty much agreed that the Babadook is sort of a manifestation of her grief and of her own trauma. And I will be real with you. Like, this was, in watching through it, this is the second time I've seen the movie, and it was still pretty hard to watch just the second time through, even because it was just stressful seeing everything that was happening to her and seeing how it took a toll on her mental state and how it led to arguably psychosis. I think that is pretty firmly planted in horror.
See, I disagree. I think when you said that it's uncomfortable, I agree. Uncomfortable viewing, but it's uncomfortable because we're watching somebody lose it over
Right.
an hour and a half. I don't think that's horrific. I think that's watching somebody like
But it has to deal with her losing her sanity and seeing apparitions and ghosts and shit.
how many ghosts and apparitions does she really see though? It's just that manifestation of her grief.
I mean, it's just the one, but
Yeah.
is there a quota we got to meet?
Well, I think if we're talking about just this one thing that we've all, like you said, we've all agreed upon is the kind of symbolization of her grief, and the whole movie is about her dealing with grief and trauma. Like, to me, that's not quote unquote scary in the same way as like a mass psycho trying to kill you, or like an actual for real ghost
certainly
haunting
not.
you. Right.
Certainly not.
So that's why I don't think it's horror in that context or in that sense. I think it's more of like an analysis of her grief, and she is seeing it through this kind of lens of horror, but there's not really a ton. I don't think there's so much dread as there is like uncomfortableness of like watching her at that meeting of like the mothers at her sister's house, where like it's kind of awkward her being there almost because everyone kind of pities her or whatever. And then just the interactions that she has at the school and whatever else. I think those are uncomfortable to watch because like, unless you're a fucking sociopath, you don't like to see bad things happen to people like that, especially when it's presented. And this is another point towards, in my opinion, it being drama. It's presented in such a realistic light. The child inspector coming to her house, and then she's freaking out and is totally disheveled, and you're worried if she's going to lose her child. But I don't think these things are horror. I think these things are, again, I think it more is an elements of drama really for me.
Well, you can both be wrong this time. That's fine.
So, on a massive, massive tone shift, Nico, I'm gonna need you to lead this part. It's Pride Month, and the Babadook kind of has some kind of status. You know what I'm saying? Why don't you explain that to us?
This is the funniest shit ever in the sort of viral history of horror as a genre, in my opinion. I don't remember which year it was. I think it was 2017, maybe. It was a few years after the Babadook released and was on Netflix. And due to either an intern just having some shits and giggles or a genuine coding error, the Babadook was listed under the LGBT sort of like pride category in their listing, which led to everyone at once on the internet being like, wait, what the fuck? Wait, what? And that year, this happened like right as Pride was happening, by the way. There were people who were dressed up as the Babadook there, and some people were hip and in the know, and others were not. We're just like, what the fuck is going on? So there came out a lot of think pieces about whether or not this is actually something that fits into sort of an LGBT lens. And for the purposes of giving that sort of analysis, I want to give a brief sort of aside to a time when I was in college. This was in my Asian American literature class, and one of my professors was mentioning how there was one of her students that was just very much so misunderstanding the text that they were reading as a class, but due to the saliency of her train of thought and her argument, it still made it have merit in the end, even though her original understanding of the book was wrong, kind of thing. There's probably a word for that somewhere, but I'm not getting it right now.
Fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it kind of thing. Yeah. I guess we can call it that. All of that to say, I think there are some themes that you could extrapolate from the movie, but I want to get either of y'all's perspectives first before I go into it myself.
My perspective on what, good sir?
How to make a good fucking pot of soup? What do you think?
You gotta put it on the
Put that
stove.
shit on the stove.
You got it, yeah.
There you go. Okay, we all know.
I think, this is the first time I've seen the movie, and as I was watching it, I knew that it was a big like LGBT like thing a couple years ago, and I knew it was because of the misplaced Netflix categorization. But I also remembered there being like, I never read any of the think pieces, but I remember that they existed. So the whole time I was kind of trying to think like, how could this be? Like, what correlation does this have? And I mean, I guess that would be like sort of in the sense that a lot of times, coming out as a gay person or, queer is very obviously difficult. And sort of that piece inside you, I guess, coming out to people and exposing that, or I don't want to say exposing, but the Babadook
Revealing.
is part of who she is, essentially. That trauma is part of who she is. And at the end, she confronts it and essentially is saying, this will always be part of me and I have to live with it. And I think that's sort of, I guess, a correlation for the LGBT community. The part that I don't quite get and agree with, and I don't know if there's a different way of thinking about this, is the Babadook is portrayed as a bad thing too. And, this negative trauma and this negative thing. And yes, it's a part of me, but I just have to live with it and whatever, which I don't think should necessarily be the right message when you look at it through the LGBT lens. But aside from that, I can understand, that other part of it as well.
I am certainly by no means an expert as a rampaging straight, but I will say that when I looked at this movie, I saw it to be a very detailed kind of almost analysis of single motherhood and a lot of the pressures, constraints, and stressors of that. And I think there are definitely analogs you could make. That's what I think. I think there are definitely a lot of analogs you could make between what Amelia went through and what people in kind of the queer community go through. However, I think if we're directly speaking, like very, very specifically about Amelia and this specific movie, I don't think there's a lot, I should say, of specific actions that happen here that I could particularly see through that. But I do think there are a ton of analogs, kind of partially like what Dan was talking about, but also through some other things as well, that you could look at things through and kind of use things like, oh, this is kind of like this, but that other thing doesn't necessarily happen in this movie, if that kind of makes any sense.
I think that's a good way to put it. And you're right. I think that certain parts of it are applicable, but others I don't think are applicable really. So.
Yeah, so now that y'all have given and thank you, I agree with what y'all are saying, like 100%. Now I'll give my perspective as the queer member of the podcast. So I recently came out back in November of last year, and when I did, it was almost like, the way I've described it is almost like I remembered part of myself, or I like learned to actually sort of accept part of who I am finally. And the scene at the end where Amelia is feeding worms to the Babadook, I kind of resonate with that in particular, just because, I'm 29 and I didn't come out until now, basically. And learning to actually access that part of myself is kind of like going down into your basement and giving some nourishment to the dark parts inside you that you wanted to hide forever, or that you just sort of didn't even realize were affecting you. So I think there's a very strong analog with that scene in particular, but otherwise, I don't think it was intentionally an LGBT movie.
I think the only real kind of, I guess, dosage or talking about really of sexuality within the movie is I do think Amelia is sexually frustrated. I think that there's
Yeah.
like twice. The first time is when there's like this dude at her office her where she works, a nursing home, and he's trying to, like he flirts with her a little bit and she smiles with him. She doesn't really smile with too many other people in the movie. And he actually comes over, he gives her some flowers, and then there's just like a complete shit show that happens in front of him, and dude just like dips out
fucking
immediately.
dips.
He's like, fuck it, I'm out. And then there's how do I say this delicately? There's a scene where Amelia's looking for some alone time, and she's got like a caveman.
She went to Ollivanders and she got herself a Hitachi wand.
Yes, that's much better than what I was gonna say. So she's got herself something for some good times, and like she can't even get through with that process because her son like bursts into the room. Geez, son, you ever heard of knocking? But no, so
That's what the Babadook does.
I know, right?
3 times.
He doesn't let you finish. So yeah, I mean that.
too.
I don't know. I think that is definitely one thing that I saw, and it's something again that I don't think is. I do think it's an honest analysis of what she was going through. You know what I mean? Like that sucks, not being able to get your own space or feeling like you can't get your own space and privacy. So that shit sucks.
Just why I'm not having kids. Okay, there's my one.
There's the one.
Had to do it. Had to do it.
Had to do it. Dan, any trivia from your side today, Dan?
Yeah, so I've got two little interesting tidbits. One, there's actually some video game samples in this movie.
I know one.
Which one is it?
Go ahead. It's at the very end when the Babadook is in the room in the darkness and there's like the monster sound or whatever.
Yep.
That's one.
Yeah, so the Babadook screaming at the end is sampled. It's Motaro from Mortal Kombat 3.
I knew it.
That's dope.
Yeah, there's also, I think in that final scene, there's also samples from Resident Evil, the original one.
That tracks.
And I can't remember what part, but there's another part where they sample XCOM, like the 1994 XCOM.
Oh shit! Hardcore people.
Wow. And Warcraft 2. There's some samples from there too.
Oh shit!
Which is really interesting to me.
For the horde.
I don't quite know. I didn't really look into where those. I don't want to say where they came from because obviously we know the games, but like how or like why was the composer or whoever did that? Were they a big video game fan or what? Because those are very specific in sort of niche video games. It's not just like, oh, here's a Street Fighter or something that's like everybody knows. And then also, one thing that I think about sometimes, occasionally when watching horror films especially, is how the actors are acting this, and especially the very horrific parts, and especially children. Okay, how are you just going to show like people getting their heads chopped off like in front of this kid or something? Like, how does this happen or how does this work? So I was reading that Noah's mom was on set for the film. Like she was there and she was like watching over everything. And also Jennifer Kent, the director, was very adamant and specific that he would not be on set anytime there was an abusive scene. Anytime that his character, Sam, was abused or anything related to that, he was not on set. And he was actually portrayed by an adult who was standing on their knees.
Oh, wow.
And to sort of get the trauma reaction and everything from him when he was actually playing, she would say things like, "I'm going to take your Legos and throw them into the river." And that's how...
That's so adorable.
And that's how they would get the reactions. Because the child was also 6 years old. In the film, Sam is 6, and the child, Noah, was also actually 6. So that's how she kind of got those reactions from him.
I always find it to be kind of interesting how, especially when working with children, how they kind of do workarounds or whatever. I forget what movie it was, but there was like heavy cursing in the movie, but there was like a strict code on set that they would never curse around the kid. And apparently it was like hilarious because they would do all types of crazy shit just to make sure the kid did not hear anybody cursing. It was pretty funny. And kind of a contrast because I forget what movie it is again. I remember exactly what the trailer looks like. It's like these three kids in school and like they're all cursing up a storm and whatnot. It's just kind of funny to see like the dichotomy sometimes and how
Right.
younger actors are treated.
For sure.
So now we go to the what would you do? And I'm not gonna lie, this is honestly probably the hardest what would you do that I've ever had to do. Just because this is a situation that, and I know we had the one with Lysol. The movie was the
Blood Quantum.
Blood Quantum. And
Go see that.
yeah, fucking amazing movie. And that one, I think, as a very tiny minority, I think maybe a little bit more relation to certain things in that movie. But this is one that literally none of us are going to experience that, like the single motherhood that Amelia is going through right now. So, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where it's difficult. So all I can say is this, right? And it's like a terrible situation, but let's say you are, you're like a single parent. Nico, you're going to have to really imagine some interesting things happening for you. But like, let's say, you got hit with like a curse that reversed what and made your who spam out some whats, and you wound up with a kid. And so all that happened. And so you've lost somebody. It's been a couple years. You've got this kid that you just can't control. And you start seeing these things and you start like hallucinating. At what point do you decide to get some fucking help?
Pretty fucking instantly. Like, I'm not gonna lie. I, in particular, resonated a lot with Amelia when I was watching this. Earlier last year and earlier into beginning of this year, I took some time off work for my own mental health, and I will never experience being a mother, but I felt a lot of empathy for Amelia just in her exhaustion, in the sort of fugue state, and just not even being able to really function as a living human being. Like, I've fucking been there. Not in the exact same way, but like pretty similar. So I would like to think I would get help pretty quickly.
Right. And Dan, I'm going to pose a separate question to you now. Well, first off, when in the movie do you think, Dan, you would go consult somebody?
Probably pretty late. I would just be like, no, I'm not going to help. It would probably be once my child would start freaking out and like really, and I could really see it's like seriously affecting them. I think that's when I would be like, all right, even if I don't want to do this, like I have to do something and get help because it's affecting my child. That's what I would like to think. That's when I would go anyways.
Yeah, I'm probably definitely along the lines of like, I'm going to solve this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna run this one solo.
You
It's
fucking
funny.
would.
It's funny. Nico talked about something he did last year into this year. So a while ago, I went on a little bit of like a vision quest. I basically cut off communication with everyone, much to Nico's chagrin, I might add. And I cut off communication with like everyone, and I just kind of disappeared for a little while to kind of like find my own way. Sometimes that's how I operate, a little bit of a weirdo. But I will say, if you have a kid, you can't do that. Like you can't. It's different once you have a kid, and so I think that for me personally, I might not necessarily turn to like a mental health professional immediately, but I would probably like hit up one of you two, be like, "Yo, dog, I ain't gonna lie, bro. I've been seeing like ghosts. Like, toss me a line here. What do you think I should do?" Because
See, then we wouldn't believe you.
Yeah.
yeah,
that's
it
true.
would, it,
Like
would, it would take a while.
5 times.
But I have a question. So Amelia, and this is one thing we didn't really get too deep into, but Amelia doesn't really have a support network. And I think that's one massive area of the movie as well, where it's not just somebody who, she lost her husband and she has this kid she can't really control. It's also, there is no support network for Amelia. Like, that was one area where that is a fact you just have to accept when you watch this movie, that she doesn't have a support network, because literally she has a sister. We're not ever told if she has, in-laws, parents, anything like that. But her sister is very obviously not super caring about her. she's kind of dismissive. She's like, it's been 7 years, get over it, is basically her statement.
Hmm.
And I want to ask you guys, so let's say it was me. At what point in time would you two, because here at DOTD, you never walk alone like Liverpool. So I want to know, Nico, at what point are you popping up to my direction if you hear these like increasingly like frantic explanations from your boy?
I mean, first time I definitely wouldn't believe you, so we're gonna give this like a 2 week grace period. I'm gonna say. I don't know. I think after the part where like you tell me that you strangled your pet to death or some shit, I'd be
Oh,
like, okay,
shit.
something's up. Something's really up.
Yeah, man. I don't know. It's fucking crazy. Personally, I feel like Dan. Actually, it's funny because for Dan, I think I would actually react like probably super fast because Dan is kind of that like very, very stable type minded person. And I feel like if Dan's over here telling me he's seeing ghosts, I gotta go help this man out, bro, because that is not Dan at all.
I was gonna say the same thing about you. As much of a troll as you are, having lived in a haunted house with you, if
Yeah.
you call me and you're like dead ass and you're like, bro, there's ghosts here, I would believe you like instantly. Like if you said, yo, there's fucking monsters here, I wouldn't believe you. But ghosts, yes, absolutely. And I probably wouldn't like come like physically come to your rescue or help or anything there. I'd give phone support, but like after maybe the second or third time of increasing, then I'd be like, all right, bro, I got to take a trip down there to see you. Like we got to solve this.
True.
Me and Dan would get there at the same time, just coincidentally.
So the message to the audience from Don't Open That Door and the What Would You Do is, if you are going through something, please seek some counseling/help. Very important.
Don't fucking gaslight your friends, Justin.
Yeah, Justin.
Yeah.
Don't know who we're talking about there. So we're going to move on to the critical review. So the Babadook. Oh, buddy. We're sitting at a 98% from the critics fresh on Rotten Tomatoes and a 72% audience score. Oh me, oh my. Well, got to lay out our scores. May as well start with what's going to be the highest. Nico.
So I do really like this movie. I like it a lot. I think that it is another example of prestige horror, and given that we've already established I'm a sucker for that shit, I think it is something that is much more cerebral isn't the right word, but very sort of almost fantastic in the way that it portrays Amelia's deteriorating state of mind as the movie goes on, and I really fuck with just the metaphors there and the themes. I am going to give this an 89.
Mm-hmm. Dan, where sit thou?
I'm going to have to give this one a 70. This is a movie where I really, really like the message and I really like the themes and sort of the entire podcast that we've talked about. Like, I haven't had anything negative to say because I really like a lot of that stuff. However, watching the movie, I wasn't really entertained. Like, it just didn't really do it for me. I was never once scared. I didn't really feel any tension. It just didn't do it for me. And I know that the point of the movie isn't to be, oh, big scary ghost monster thing, scary, bad, whatever, scare you to death. But I think that in execution, the film could have been scarier. I just think there are ways that it could have been more effective. So I'm kind of disappointed in a lot of that. But I really like the message. So that holds up the score to me quite a bit. So all in all, I think I'd give it a 70.
So I had to do a little bit of soul searching before I gave my thing, only because I knew that having seen this movie already, I know and understand that it covers some pretty serious and deep topics. But within my head, I rationalized to myself that even if you do cover very serious topics or deep topics, that shouldn't make you immune from criticism. And I think that while I certainly appreciate and like the fact that they chose to cover these issues, And I think in that respect, it is a standout. There was a lot that I didn't like in this movie. I think one thing in particular is they could have, and this is just for me a qualm that I personally didn't like, but it's my score, so it's the ghost. I wanted more Babadook, and I potentially wanted like I wanted more from that. I think that's probably the best way to put it. I I like the cinematography. I like the sound design. I thought those were both very good aspects. I just sometimes found the writing a little bit lacking, and at times, I hate to say it, but I found it to be dull at moments and at times where it felt like the plot was really kind of like moving along. It was kind of repetitious sometimes where we'd go from like it would literally go in like a circle, and I realized that's the point, but it would sometimes go from like Amelia having trouble in her work life, son super loud, can't sleep, personal life, son super loud, can't sleep. And like there was like a circle for a little while there going on of just like that happening. And I understand you're supposed to feel that because Amelia was going through that. But I wasn't necessarily going through a lot of what Amelia was going through. And again, this is me, as I said before, the rampaging straight man talking about this. I feel like if somebody was maybe a single mother who went through something similar to that, there might be a completely different score there. But I can only judge something based on my personal experiences. So I'm going to give it a 65 for myself, but I understand why somebody would want to give it a higher score.
That was a whole lot of backpedaling for an actually pretty reasonable score from you, I will say.
Was it really a reasonable score?
You're just like, this is my score. Fuck y'all. Look, this is my perspective, okay? It's not your perspective. It's my perspective. It's my score. 65. Like, I was expecting a fucking, 23 or something with all that shit.
Oh, really? You think so? Nah, oh, no. I mean, it's one thing where it would be this movie would have to sincerely fuck up for it to cover the material that it did and for me to give it a 23. Because I do think it's very important that not every horror movie can be, whoa, it's a ghost.
Certainly not.
Not every movie can be that. And I do appreciate the creativity that goes into certain aspects of this movie. So I'm not going to just cut it down to pieces for that. But, and I tried to remove this from my score as much as possible, but I literally remember the first time I saw this movie, it had just come out. There was this girl in my office and she was like, hey, do you want to get scared out of your boxers? And I was like, hell yeah, I do. Watch The Babadook, scariest movie you've ever seen. I guarantee it. Well, she was a liar in real life and about this movie. Because you know why? It did not happen that way. I walked into this with the wrong framing. And I think that, much like Bly Manor, I think I enjoyed it more the second time around because I walked into it with the correct mental framing. I walked into it with the correct mindset of, this is what this movie is. And so to that extent, yeah. Let's break down to it, shall we? So, recommendation. I didn't forget this time, Nico.
Proud of you.
Do we recommend this movie to the audience? Dan?
I do, yes.
Nico?
I do, yes.
I do. And let me tell you, I paused on that I do, but I do, if only in the context of viewing it not as a horror. I think it's a worthy movie, not necessarily a worthy horror. And so, do I think the movie's worth watching? Absolutely, I do. 10 billion%, absolutely, I do. But just, you got to walk into it with the right kind of mental framing. Okay. Now, golden seal of approval, I'll put my foot down and say no. Who want to mess with me?
Well, there it is.
Dan, were you going to give it the golden seal?
Yeah, I would say no as well.
I don't think I would either.
What?
Actually.
Wow.
You gave that joint an 89.
No, I know. But similar to last week's episode, I really fuck with this movie. But it doesn't quite reach the zenith of what I consider to be a gold seal of approval material.
You know, Nico, we're not so different after all.
Now you can eat shit.
All right, then. So
Hey, that's what Amelia told Sam at one point. If you're hungry, go eat shit.
Yeah.
Oh no!
That was a statement.
That was actually, yeah.
Any last words before we bring this one to a cease?
Yeah, how the fuck does Sam do real magic, bro? At the end, he puts a coin. He covers a coin, and when he lifts the cover, it's a fucking dove. How?
Yo,
Bro, fucking
I
how?
thought that was the point. No, I thought that was the point of the movie all along. Sam is magic, and the Babadook is a personification of him, like putting his mother's grief into reality so she can face it. Right?
Where was that take like 50 minutes ago?
Yeah, bro. We've been past that. All right, we're going to restart this podcast. All right. Hey,
Nico's
everyone.
salty because literally, what if I had said that? Nico would have been like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. He can actually do magic."
Straight up.
That's pretty wild, though, Dan. Good point, and maybe one for another time. Never. So, Nico, anything from you, bro?
I got nothing.
All right. Well, that's been it from us here at Don't Open That Door. If you like what we've said, don't like what we've said, or want to say something, even if you don't want to say something, drop us a line. We're on Twitter and Instagram at DOTD Horror. We're also on Facebook. Don't Open That Door. But that's been it from Dan, Nico, and Jus. We've been saying this since the start of the pandemic, aka the start of our podcast, but definitely take care of one another. We want to take a quick, serious moment to tell you that if you are going through something like this, you are certainly not alone. Please, please, please get help. Contact the proper people. The resources are out there. I probably should have looked up a number, but the resources are out there. Definitely for sure. Seek help, talk to people. Get help, really, because it's not just going to impact you. It's going to impact everyone around you. And we want everyone to be healthy. So take care of yourselves. Take care of each other as well.
Except for you, Kimberly.
And as always, dear listener, don't open that door. Bye.
Big up yourself.
Big up yourself. That's what you got to do. You got to big up yourself.
Big up yourself.